I think I've mentioned this, is we watched a movie a week and a half ago. Now we're going to read the book that goes with the documentary. It's a debate between an atheist and a Christian, and so it's just going to be a book discussion, good and bad, some of the arguments and whatnot. So if that's something that's up your alley, we can hook you up. But I doubt it's a big number of people who want to explore philosophy and apologetics and stuff like that. But hopefully we'll start that next week after our Bible study. Let me quickly, Friday is the Ark, which is why I'm wanting us to cover a good bit of material. Let me grab the remote real quick. So we hope to leave at noon, and Lane won't be there. I don't think Cheney will be there either, but we will still go, and they'll help answer a lot of the things that we're just going to skip over. I'm not an expert on all of it, so hopefully Ken Ham and the boys can help us with some of that, and they'll visualize some of the stuff. So we'll cross that bridge whenever we get there. So Genesis chapter 6. Hopefully we can get through the end of chapter 7. We are done with Nephilim and all the talk of giants and everything else. So let's start in verses 9 to 12, where we get the introduction to the Ark narrative. One of the things you're going to find in the Ark narrative is how repetitive it is. This would be a good example of it, where the world is evil, Noah is righteous, and what God does and all that sort of stuff. It's part of the reason why I think we can cover this amount of material. A lot of it is straightforward, and a lot of it is repetitive. So verse 9 through 12 says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth." You can already see the repetition, can't you? We've already been told all of this stuff about Noah. The earth is corrupt, so much so you've got potentially demonized offspring, or at least you have a mixing of the families, the righteous and unrighteous line. So we already have that. And we also have just in general comment that man was wicked. And the wickedness was great. So you have that being repeated. Now, part of the reason is because how it's introduced. So it says there, verse 9, "These are the generations of Noah." That is a very common way to articulate the opening of a new narrative. So what may come before it, like everything we've got with Noah so far, is a conclusion of one part and an introduction to the next. So the genealogy is part of the Noah narrative. It's also part of the Cain and Abel narrative, right? It's both and. So we get some repetitions. So this phrase in the generation, we're not going to read all these, the generations of heavens and earth, right? This is creation. Remember that after creation, we get a retelling of it with emphasis on day 6. Well, it's introduced with, "These are the generations." Same language. Chapter 5, right? You get the genealogy of Seth through Adam. Same thing. Chapter 10, you're going to get it with more genealogies in 10 and 11. And 11 is yet another one. So you get 3. Ham, Shem, and Japheth all get their own language. Ishmael gets 1. That's another genealogy. Isaac, Esau, the story of Jacob, particularly with emphasis on Joseph, where his story's already been going on. So this is more about Joseph and his brothers. So you see that throughout Genesis, this is a common phrase. So what we have here is the beginning of a new narrative. So if you have subtitles in your Bible, which are put there by editors and publishers, not by God himself, you probably have a new break in verse 9. It's very obvious in the text. This is a beginning of a narrative. But you'll notice there, verse 9, the words righteous man and blameless are connected for the first time in the Bible. Now, by righteous and blameless, the Bible isn't saying that Noah was perfect. He's fallen like everyone else is. But it is to emphasize that he stands out from everyone else. These opening verses of this narrative really emphasizes Noah is very righteous, and particularly in contrast to the rest of the world. He is very different. So this phrase, righteous and blameless, particularly in the Proverbs, the righteous of the blameless, right? The righteous guards him in the way of blamelessness, right? So this is big. Jesus uses this, or the New Testament, I should say, that his parents, I think this is Zachariah and Elizabeth, are described as righteous and blameless. Paul tells us to be that he was righteous under the law, thus blameless. He's talking about his life as a Pharisee. And then, of course, he says that you are witnesses in God how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct. Well, this all begins with Noah. And this is a common biblical way to describe the people of God, that to live a consistent, faithful life. And Noah walks with God. Well, that's verbatim, essentially, of chapter 5, verse 22 with Enoch, right? Enoch walks with God, Noah walks with God, right? We were purposely drawing a connection between them. And you'll see 3 sons. We've already been introduced to these 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, all that. Now, one thing I think is worth highlighting is how the story of Noah, we've talked about this, or the flood, is a creation narrative. And we'll see some instances of that in the story. But one of the ways this is carried out is how Noah is likened to Adam, and we'll also see how he's likened to Moses. One of my favorite parts about the Bible, the last probably 10 years, I've done a lot of exploration of biblical theology because it's just so fascinating how the Bible fits together so well. So you see the themes introduced by Adam are now picked up in Noah, which will later be picked up in Moses. Right? It's fantastic the way the Bible is written. It's almost like it's divine. So you can consider some of the parallels between Noah and Adam. Noah is a direct descendant to Adam, right, or of Adam. Both walked with God. Remember that God enters the garden after the fall, and the implication is that this is a regular occurrence where they walk together, and he walked with me and talked with me, and he tells me I am his own. Both received God's promises. We're going to spend a lot of time on it, but in this story, we were told that Noah God cuts a covenant with Noah. It is. Now, it's fulfilled in chapter 9 with the sacrifices and the rainbow and all that. But it's introduced in 6 and 7, the idea of this covenant. Well, Adam gets a covenant. It's called marriage. Right? I'll let you decide whether or not that's a covenant of judgment or grace. But Noah's covenant with judgment, he gets the grace that though man continues to be wicked, I will not destroy the earth like that. They're caretakers of animals. You ever consider that? Adam names the animals. Noah domesticates animals for the purpose of putting them on a boat. So he had to come over and get over that fear of, I don't know, spiders or snakes or mice or whatever it is you're afraid of. He had to get over it. Vampires, I don't know. They both had 3 sons. This one rocked me. How have I missed this? Adam and Eve had 3 sons. You know what? I bet you do the same thing I do. No, they had 2 sons. Cain and Abel. Okay, scratch out Abel. Now they got Seth, 2 sons. Well, they had 3 sons. I don't know if you know this, but Eve had to give birth at least 3 times to them boys, right? I mean, I don't know how I've missed this. Right? I always thought, it's just, why Noah had 3 and Adam and Eve had 2? No, they each had 3 kids. Now, they had more than that, yes, but in the narrative, the emphasis is on the 3. Now, in both, one of those 3 kids becomes the unrighteous seed. Ham for Noah, and emphasis is on Canaan, Ham's son, Noah's grandson. It's, of course, Cain for Adam and Eve. They both work the soil. Of course, that leads to the downfall of Noah. So remember that Adam sins by the fruit of a plant. Noah sins by the fruit of a plant. So essentially, same story. They both have their fall with fruit. Both sin through the fruit of the tree. Both father a wicked son who is cursed. So what we have here is a Noah story. But what is different about this story, in contrast to Genesis 1 and 2, is that God must first decreate everything. And we'll see the language from that in order to recreate everything. So you have to have the unraveling of creation in order for God to create yet again. Remember, in the Bible, there's a theme that salvation is creation, and God does that here. He has to kill in order to heal. We have that here. It's fascinating stuff. I find that stuff fascinating. You may not. In fact, let's see that creative stuff. Down in verse 11, the earth was corrupt in God's sight. The earth was filled with violence. That word field should stick out to you, shouldn't it? Because we see it in the creation narrative. Genesis 1:22, God blessed them and said, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So what is the biblical mandate, the cultural mandate of humanity is to not just have children, but to raise children and to be vice regents of creation. With God, we are to exercise regency over God's creation. So to fill the earth with God's image bearers. But what is the biblical writer telling us here? Man multiplied, yes, and filled the earth, but not with just God's image bearers, with God's peace and rest and love. They filled it with violence. We saw this, I think, last week, that man will, when they eat of the fruit, think they are choosing wisdom, the good, but in retaining the knowledge of evil prematurely, man chooses evil. If you don't believe me, just again, turn on your television. The things that we do today in the name of whatever, justice, politics, or whatever, tribalism, is foolishness, nonsense. But we have a pattern of doing precisely that. Likewise, in verse 28, God blessed them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, have dominion over them. So we are failing, that's the whole point. We are failing at this mandate of filling the earth. Instead, we're filling it with violence. Notice again verse 12, more creation language. It says, God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled, there's that word again, with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. It's easy to skip over this. Notice in verse 12 that God saw. Is that what your translation says? God saw the wickedness of man. Now, does that sound familiar? Sure, it's the creation narrative. Genesis 1:4, God saw the light, and it was good. He called the light day. Likewise, verse 31, God saw everything he had made. Behold, it was very good. Now, what do you have here? You have a reversion of that. God saw all that man had made and considered it corrupt and wicked. Right, so yes, God sees Noah and finds grace in the eyes of Noah. But at the same time, God sees the wickedness of man, and thus it must come by judgment. Well, in chapter 6, verse 13 to 22, going into the chapter, you get God's plan. And one of the things you'll find, and I don't know if we'll read every word of these two chapters, is God gives the plan, and then we get the plan written out for us. Have you ever noticed, your average story will, if you're given the plan, then you rush through the actual event, right? Because there's no point in doing it twice. Well, Moses gives it to us twice. God says, do this, and he does it, because he says, this is what's going to happen, and then we're told in detail that it happens, right? So there's some repetition going on here. But notice God is speaking to Noah and gives him instructions. Now, many will, and I'm not going to take time to do this, many see parallels. We mentioned that there's a parallel between Noah and Adam. There's parallels between Noah and Moses. One of them is how both men receive instructions from God on building something. So we've done the whole temple talk. So you have creation itself as a type of, or cosmos as a type of temple. The Garden of Eden was a temple, and that the temple is actually based off of the Garden of Eden. I think the ark is maybe a prototype temple, but what does Moses build? He builds a portable temple, he builds the tabernacle. And so God gives instructions to Noah to build an ark, by which God says, come into the ark. Thus, it's a type of temple. But we also see Moses is given instructions, and both men are charged with building them. And with that being true, you can make in this case, Noah is like Solomon later on, David and Solomon in building of the temple. But you'll see verse 13, he says he's going to destroy them. I'm interested in what your translation says. God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Do you have with the earth or on the earth or something else? You got with? Does anyone have on? Don, what is Peterson here? See, after last week, I don't know about your boy Eugene.
Yeah. God said to Noah, it's all over. It's the end of the human race. The violence is everywhere. I'm making it clean sweep.
So he just bypasses the issue completely. So this is going to be one of those bad weeks with the messages, the Message Bible. Maybe next week you'll get it right. So everyone has with the earth. Now think about let's just say that's the only way to translate that. What is that implying? It's a perfectly fine translation. It's if you want to be literal, it's a better translation. So God will destroy mankind with the earth. What is he saying with that language he's saying about earth? He's saying is that God is going to destroy not just humanity, he's going to destroy the earth. You see the decreation language. Everything God had created was good. Now it is evil and corrupt. This is a cosmic reality. One of the things we don't talk about enough in conservative Christian theology is the cosmic nature of the fall. Like when we first got here, we talked about this. I mean, early on, probably our first 3-4 weeks on Wednesday nights. So you may remember that the three stools of the gospel. So the gospel has an individual aspect to it. I must believe and repent and all that. There's a communal aspect to the gospel, which is why we have the church, the kingdom of God, all of that. Remember that the New Testament was written to churches, not to you, okay? So you got to read them within the community of believers. There's a cosmic aspect of it too. I mean, every time you read Jesus at the Olivet Discourse or Revelation, if you notice how much of it has to do with the earth? So when the heavens fall and the skies come down, right, and all that sort of stuff, and you're like, what is that about? It's decreation language. It's the cosmic effect of God's salvation, essentially. So whenever Jesus is raised from the dead, what happens? Earthquakes happen. Tombs get tore up, right? There's a cosmic response to the resurrection. There would be a cosmic response to the return of Christ. You get a hint of that here, don't you? Now, what it's not saying is God says, you know what, there used to be a giant mountain in West Kentucky. Flood came and God said, we'll just put that over in the Himalayas. That's not what your boy Moses is doing here. So you could translate this as God will destroy everything on the earth. And that Hebrew works just as well. But with the earth brings out the cosmic idea that God will recreate everything. So in many ways, people see a connection between the flood narrative, and we'll see an example of this in Genesis 1, verse 2. The Spirit of God hovered over the expanse of the earth, right, and water and all that sort of stuff. It's almost like a flood happening there. Because out of that expanse of water, God divides everything. The sky and the sea. We have essentially the same thing going on here. It's a retelling of the creation story. Verse 14 to 16, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. We have no idea what gopher wood is. Does anyone have cypress wood there? Do you have gopher? Don, I'm afraid to ask. He probably has, maple. What is it? What is that? Where did he get that? Who? Okay. It's what the Titanic was made out of. Hope not. Because once they land on Ararat, it's, hope you're not in love with someone because you won't get the other side of the broken wood. Anyways, the word gopher, which is most of our translation, except for Eugene Peterson in the Message, is a transliteration, essentially, of the Hebrew. Whenever you see that, the biblical writers are saying, we don't know what this word means, so we're just going to leave it in the text. Some of your translations, or some interpretations at least, will say it's cypress. I think that's what Solomon uses in the temple. And there's some etymological connection there, but it's still uncertain. Look, I don't know. Gopher wood is gopher wood. I can tell you that the ark in Dry Ridge is not made of gopher wood. I don't know what it's made of, but, they've got to meet, federal government regulations. So maybe it's tiki wood or whatever, teak wood or whatever it is.
Maybe the wood wasn't nearby and they had to go for
I just assumed they got it from Minnesota, had shit from Minnesota. Isn't that where the Gophers play? It's not as good, but it's the best I got on the top of my head. But so anyways, that's the gopher. Where were we? Verse 14. Make rooms in the ark, covered inside and out with pitch. This is how you will make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits. And height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above. Set the door of the ark in its side and make it lower, second, and third deck. I'll just quickly deal with this. One is that word ark. Outside of the ark narrative, it's found only one other time in the Bible. You all remember where it is? Moses. So Exodus 2, when she, Moses' mother, could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and that word for basket is ark. Same word used here. Now, don't overread it, right? This is where theology helps us read in our Bible, because we should take it literal in one sense, but not so literal. Moses' mother is not putting her son into a little basket the size of a football and a half long, right? You don't be that literal. It's a basket. That's why we translate basket. But theologically, the same writer, I believe Moses of Genesis and Exodus, wants you to see the connection. Think about the relationship between Moses and Noah. Both arks save the occupant from a watery trial. So in Prince of Egypt, you may remember, you see the cartoon, alligators try to bite at it. The waves are really bad, and all this sort of stuff, right? Well, okay, whatever. Now, Moses will go through something like this again. I don't know if we probably won't do this, but the parting of the Red Sea, the language used here is similar to that, in that God opens the water, right? And here you have a flood. Later, Moses, who is a type of Noah, who is a type of Adam, opens the water. He came by an ark and opens the water. All this stuff is fascinating to me. You may think it's nerdy and you couldn't care less, but I think it's great. And Moses and Noah, of course, are deliverers. Different type of deliverers. Noah delivers all of humanity. Moses delivers the people of Israel, but still delivers nonetheless. Let's look at these measurements here. 450, I put feet long. It's cubits, isn't it? No, okay, 300 cubits is 450 feet long. That is about a football field and a half. So 150 yards. 75 feet wide, 7 parking spaces, unless you're at like certain places where you don't know how you get a Pinto in there. 45 feet high is about take a state building 4 stories high. So if you ever go to the Ark in Dry Ridge, this is basically the measurements they use. It's a giant boat in the middle of the country. Okay, that's what it is. I mean, they have to drive you out there. It's you drive out there like that's a big boat. That could put a lot of animals on. So. But anyways, hope they had Netflix on the Ark. It covers, I don't know where they get this stuff, I assume it's right. It's about 100,000 square feet of space, a volume capacity of about 860 boxcars. That sounds impressive. I don't know about you. Now, the rabbis believe, this isn't in the Bible, but the rabbis believe the top floor was for Noah and the family. The middle level was for all the animals, and the bottom level was for refuse. I don't know if that's true or not. Makes sense to me. But I can tell you in Dry Ridge, all 3 levels are for your viewing and buying. Okay? So you can do that whatever you want. There's no rudder on the boat because they're not going anywhere. They're going to float up. They're going to float down. That is the job. And it seems to be built that way. The Gilgamesh boat, if you're familiar with that, we could spend a lot of time on the other flood stories. If you want to do that, we could do it next week. I didn't think it was necessary. But Gilgamesh's is like a cube. It's just a weird-shaped boat. I think this one makes more sense. What about the roof there? Roof, as you Frankfortites might say. I think John Currit's helpful here, so I'm just going to quote him. Save me some time. There is to be an opening around the entire perimeter of the ark. The purposes for that construction are clear. It is the whatever principle, allow light and clean air to enter from above. Something tells me that's a typo. But it lets light and clean air in. With all those animals and the refuse with it, you're going to need that. And it is out of that you're going to have the doves and all of that sort of stuff. Okay. All right, verse 18 to 22 is where the animals are put on. How many animals are on the ark? Let me ask you that. How many animals go on the ark?
All of them.
2 of every kind, right? Because you can go down there and you can read at the end of chapter 6. Hold on, you're getting ahead of me. I'm trying to make a profound point that I assume half of us already know. It's one of those pet peeves. Like, why do we have 3 wise men? The text doesn't tell us that. It's 3 gifts. Could not one guy go out and buy 3 gifts for his wife and kids? Of course he could. We don't have to have 3 wise men. We got to have 3 wise men, even though they're not even at the nativity. We got to do it. Heaven forbid, if you move them in the sanctuary, you will be condemned eternally. Not that that's ever happened to me. Same thing with the 2 of every kind. So you get them there in verse 18 to the end, male and female, obviously. The issue is in chapter 7 we discover, go down to verse 2 of chapter 7, take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate. 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens, also male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of the earth. So even though you don't have the Mosaic law, you already have a bifurcation between clean and unclean animals. At least Noah understood this. Now, this isn't unique in the Bible. The idea of tithing predates the law of Moses. Circumcision predates the law of Moses. So this would be part of that scenario. Now, the reason you have 7 of every clean is because Noah is going to worship by means of sacrifice. So he is to be like Abel, right? He's going to offer a good sacrifice. He's going to do it much like Adam and Eve in pure worship with God. So creation's going to happen, and out of creation comes worship, right worship. It's a retelling of the creation story and the Adam story. But if I don't know if you know this, but if you only have 2 of an animal and you sacrifice one, you're not going to have any more of those animals. Right? So you got to have 7 of those. And 7 makes sense. Why? Creation story. Right? It's the perfect number. And that 7 is going to show up again. Well, chapter 7, we get the flood narrative. And Noah and them are ordered to get on the ark. Verse 1, the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Does anyone else have a different translation than go? I wonder what you King Jimmy's. Anyone got a King Jimmy here? It says come, all right? Same thing as King James, I believe. Anyone else have come into the ark?
Now, board the ship.
Get on board the ship. I tell you, I think Eugene Peterson watched the Titanic before he translated Genesis 6 to 9. All aboard! Well, there's a big difference between come and go, right? If I say, go outside into the rain, I'm inside where it's not raining. If I say, come inside where it's dry, you're coming to where I am. Go means leave me. That's why I tell the outlaws all the time. Alvin, Kat, what time did you all say you're leaving? Right? It's always the first question I want to ask them, right? When are you leaving again? But coming says you're going to join with me. So it's a big difference. Is God on the ark or not? You know, it's probably a little bit of both, isn't it? God can't be confounded to the upper room of the ark. But it's interesting. The word means both. It can mean both come and go. But what you choose to translate that is an interesting discussion you would have with that committee, isn't it? My favorite sermon by Oliver B. Green, I think Danny and I have talked about this. It takes this one verse and does an entire sermon how God tells Noah, because he's reading King James, come into the ark. And he develops an entire, I love that sermon. I can't find it online. If any of you all have that sermon, digitalize it, put it on the YouTube, because I'm going to listen to it 100 times. My youth minister, when we go to Cornerstone Music Festival in Illinois, would play that. I loved it. And he had that, he was a fire and brimstone sort of guy. And the Lord said, come into the ark. I love that. Just absolutely love that. But nevertheless, verse 4 and 5, the countdown begins. Verse 4, for in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days, 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. So we got 2 numbers here, 7 and 40. 7 should be obvious. But notice what happens here. In the creation story, 7 days climaxes in God resting. In this story, 7-day climaxes in God destroying. It's decreation language. Now, he's got 7 days to get all the aardvarks and everything else onto the boat, right? So for 7 days, the man named Rest is working. So on the 7th day, when he comes into the boat, what is he doing? Noah is Noahing. He's resting. And if you don't find that fascinating, you're never going to like me probably teaching. I just love that stuff. Love it. Because you don't get that in Sunday school. There's nothing wrong with Sunday school. When you're a little kid, you color Noah's Ark, right? And there's giraffes and elephants. Apparently, they all came in from Africa, and I guess. And that's fine for little kids. But hopefully, the more you read the Bible, the more you pick up on this stuff. Now, what do we do with the number 40? Let me give you a spiel. Don't overdo it. 40 shows up all over the Bible.
It's a round trip time to heaven.
40 minutes, we're going to be done with Mark, I think. All right, so 40 shows up in some interesting times in the Bible. Noah's Ark, right here, obviously. Moses, his life is broken into 3 40-year periods. In Egypt, in the wilderness, and in the wilderness again, right? So Meridian and later the Exodus. So you get 40. Now, we usually emphasize the Meridian story. Not Meridian, it's where my sister lives. Help me out. Miriam is his sister. Where did Moses go? Not to Meridian, Mississippi. Now you're confused, aren't you? Midian, thank you. That is going to be a problem from here on out. My sister lives in Meridian, Mississippi. That's where Moses went, okay? Well, insert your favorite Mississippi joke here. But the 12 spies, right? 40 days in Canaan. David and Goliath, 40. Remember, he taunts for 40 days. If you don't remember that, you weren't paying attention a few weeks ago. Elijah's in the wilderness for 40 days. Israel's in the wilderness for 40 days. Jesus is in the wilderness for 40 days. It's just a sample. Can you all think of a major Christian book that develops his entire approach to discipleship on the number 40? I bet a bunch of you all have read it. In fact, it's the best-selling Christian English book. Used to be Pilgrim's Progress. Brody, you should know it's Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren.
Oh, yeah.
It's 40 days. And he develops, the reason it's 40 days is because of this. Now, I'm not going to pick on Rick Warren, I think he's a pretty good guy, and I've read bits and pieces of Purpose-Driven Life. I'm not a fan of Purpose-Driven Youth Ministry. I think I had a Purpose-Driven root beer one time. It was a lot of fuzz, a little bit of liquid. I love that joke. I didn't make it up. I just love it. The youth ministry one, or the church one, I'm sorry, I wasn't a fan of. But Purpose-Driven Life's fine. But he bases that on, the idea of 40 is God leads you through a time of testing, and you come out better, right? So Jesus has that and all the others. Okay, whatever. But some people went through that trying time for more than 40 days or 40 years. I mean, how long was Joseph in prison? Just look at the Bible. So don't be dogmatic on the number 40. There's something going on there. It's like parables. Every time you see a parable, don't spiritualize every bird and stone in that parable. I struggled with one in today's devotion. Don't know if I got it right, probably didn't. But people try to spiritualize everything in parables. So we do the same thing with numbers. Okay. But sorry, that's my spiel. All right, verses 6 to 10, I want to read it. It says, Noah was 600 years old when he got into the boat. See there? When you retire, your life is really just beginning. By the way, the reason that's important, I think, is it breaks the cycle. In chapter 5, it was you were born, you have children, and you die. What's the story of Noah? He's born, he has children, and at 600 years old, God does something great in his life. Now, that should encourage you. If you think you've lived a boring life, you're alive because God's not done with you, right? Miss Marzell struggled with that. Some of you all remember her suffering. Let me tell you, I learned more from watching Miss Marzell suffer well than I could from reading a book on it. And she struggled with, why am I still here? Right? I am in constant pain. I needed to see an example of faith through something like that. And I'm sure many of us have stories like that. Perhaps some of her greatest work were in those final years. So he's 600 and he does that. Okay, the flood is in verses 11 to 16. Notice verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were open. I'm sure that those days and months fall on your birthday. I don't know when that is. But what is important is that phrase, great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were open. This is helpful to me. I don't know if it's helpful to you. What you have then is water from below, water from above. Now, that means that's a lot of water. However, remember what we have is decreation happening here. In fact, that phrase deep is used in the creation account, Genesis 1:2, where the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, the Spirit of God. So we've talked about Genesis 1:2. And what happens? Out of that, where the water hovers, covers the earth, and the Spirit of God hovers over it, now what's the story? And eventually that separates. Now what is it? The waters from below, the waters from above meet. Now what do you have? The entire earth is encompassed with water again. It's decreation. It's an unfolding of the creation narrative. I just love that. And the Lord shuts them in there in verse 16. There's 8 people on the boat, every beast, all that sort of stuff. So now that all the beasts are dying, other than that which is on the boat, humanity, everything, again, it's an unfolding or a reversion of the days of creation. So the waters are back, and if it's raining, you have no sun right now. You have the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, all of them are dying. Humanity is dying. Creation is undone over this period of time. I mean that's everything else is repetition of what we already have in chapter 6. Every male and female of each animal go in. Let's just read verse 17 to the end. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. So as God's Spirit hovered over creation, now the ark hovers over creation. I just love that. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. The ark floated on the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. I looked up how deep that, I don't remember what it was. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm in the earth, and all mankind. For repetition, Genesis 1. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Genesis 1, the breath of life. Remember, God breathed into Adam life. Verse 23, he blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals, creeping things, the birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. By the end of it all, they are on the ark for over a year, which is, I assume, because they were trying to not catch COVID-19, right? Is that they stayed on that ark till the vaccine came out, right? And then they want to make sure that everyone else who took the vaccine survived. So they weren't with the first ones to get the vaccine. Too soon to make jokes? I don't know what are the rules on some of that. Okay, so that's it. The Lord shut them in. The Lord protected them. We'll see that with David Sunday morning or Sunday evening, whichever one you come to. Okay, what is the most common question we get from Noah's flood? I would suspect there's 2 issues one is, what do you do with other similar narratives, particularly those in Egypt and Mesopotamia? The Epic of Gilgamesh is the most famous. It's not the only one. If you want to explore that, we can do it next week. A little bit, but it's whatever you want. Some that the young men would probably like to explore. One of the things to notice, let me touch on briefly, those are polytheistic stories. This is a monotheistic story. The gods in those stories are heathens. By that I mean they're just as corrupt as humans. And in fact, in Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods are frightened by the waters. And I think what you have in Moses, in the way he tells the story, is a polemic against the nations. We saw in the creation story that God is sovereign even over the sea monsters, the dragons, if you will. So too we see that God is the one who is the cause and sovereign over nature. Whereas in the Epic of Gilgamesh and other similar Mesopotamian and Egyptian stories, the gods are subject to nature. So I think this is a polemic. And I think it's more respectable in terms of a narrative that could have actually happened. The other ones have just these weird stories. And weird descriptions. Okay, the other, probably the most common question we get with this is the flood universal or not? Okay, I think it is. There's the 40. Was the flood universal or not? There's really three options you have here. One is it's universal. That's my position. That's also the answer in Genesis position. The answer in Genesis explains pretty much everything in science by the flood, like the Ice Age, is it Pangea? Is that we were all together and then they spread out? So like South America used to fit in Africa or whatever it was. Is that Pangea?
Yes.
Okay. We need more homeschool people here to correct me on everything. No, so they explain Pangea that the flood separated the continents. That seems a bit much for me, but I don't know. If you're just hanging out on top, what do you care what happens on the bottom? Other than if the earth is moving like that, that is a tsunami that no boat is going to resolve. But I don't know anything about that stuff, so those who go Friday, you can agree or disagree. I do think the Ice Age one may be a possibility, though. Okay, so it can be universal. It can be local. That's the Epic of Gilgamesh idea, and scholars who prefer that story and why it's so popular. The third option is it was the known world. Moses didn't know anything about Mount McKinley, not to say a racist term like that, but I can't remember what it's called now. Therefore, he only knew the mountains of Egypt. Yeah. Good. There you go. It's like Pluto will always be a planet. The highest mountain in America is always going to be Mount McKinley. He was the assassinated president of the United States. Anyways. Okay. So this is why I think it's universal, and I'll go to this word. First of all, word usage. The word for flood used in chapter 6 to 11 is unique. It's not the typical word. It really describes something that is catastrophic. One other time it's used in the Old Testament, Psalm 29. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. The idea isn't that God is sitting over a small area of the earth. God is sitting over everything. So it really implies a universal. The purpose of the flood is universal. Think about how often in reading the story, words like, so that's the third one, right? The purpose of the flood is to deal with human evil. And if it isn't universal, what does that say about human evil? It says, yeah. So you don't have to worry about the Aztecs, because they're not around yet. The Aztecs in Central America, because they're not so bad, right? Because it didn't hit them. You don't have to worry about the Celts in Ireland or the Vikings in Normandy. Beowulf is fine. Why? Because they're good guys, till the Romans show up. Well, no, the idea is that all of mankind is evil. Thus, a global flood ends the decreation sort of idea. The terms, how else can you interpret words like all, every, and whole? One way of doing that. The testimony of Scripture, I think, is pretty clear on this. Psalm 104, he set the earth on its foundation so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. So at verse 5, the earth is everything. Verse 6, the earth has to be everything. Right? You can read the rest of Psalm. Peter does the same thing in 2 Peter. That's supposed to be 2 Peter 3. I'm pretty sure it's 3. For they deliberately overlooked this fact that the heavens existed long ago, the earth was formed out of water, and through water by the word of God, and that by means of these then existed was deluged, and water and perished. Again, the idea of deluge, of that word. God's faithfulness is another reason. Genesis 8:21, when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. Remember the story of Cain and Abel? So you can see that through that. He said in his heart, does God have a heart? Does he have a blood-pumping muscle? I don't know. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. So it implies, if it's a commandment that is universal, then the flood must be universal. Finally, geological evidence. I'm not an expert on this. My son would be better at this than me. Mark is 10 times better than any of us combined. But let me just point out two things. One is rocks. I'm stealing this from the Institute of Creation Research. They're young earth creationists like Answer in Genesis. I like some of their stuff. I don't like all of their stuff. We used to get their magazine, read it with the kids. It's a free magazine if you want. It's real short. We'll read it with the kids. It's some fascinating stuff. They do cute little videos on YouTube. You can get an email from them. All that sort of, I don't think I subscribe to it anymore. Mount Everest in the Himalayan range, along with the Alps, Rockies, Appalachians, Andes, and most of the world's other mountains are composed of ocean bottom sediments, full of marine life laid down by the flood. So you can see the interpretation. But the idea here is all these mountain ranges way up there have rocks and troglodytes. Is that the term, Mark? At the top of the mountain. The question is, how did they get there? Right? Now, look, I didn't dig up rocks when I was growing up. I kicked and threw balls. Okay, that was my life. That's all. I liked women in sports. That was it. That's all I cared about. Eventually, I started working when I had my one woman. I really liked that one woman, and I had sports, right? And my son, on the other hand, loves rocks. I don't get it. I couldn't tell you the difference between one rock and the other. And man, he is. And Mark's been really, really good for him because I'm not. He collects rocks. He just loves it. They've been on rock trips, and I picked up one. I was like, "This is a shell." Son, have you seen this? How did the shell get here? He goes, "Yeah, they're all over the place." Like, what do you mean they're all over the place, right? Right. We're on top of one of these Owen County hills, which is like the Himalayas, growing up. And he's like, "Yeah, I know." Like, what do you mean you know? Like, how did this? When was there water here? Right? And how did that happen? So that was cool to me in Owen County in Frankfort, let alone to go to the top of some large mountain range, the Rockies or Himalayas, and you find it. I can't explain all that. I can't. I'm not saying it has to be the flood. I'm saying I have no other explanation than the flood. Okay? I don't think birds took them up there. Why are they favoring these things? Okay? I don't know. Do your own research. The other is fossils. This is one thing I love about the Creation Museum and the Ark is we have fossils. I could put up pictures for you, but I won't. Or I don't have them, but Google it. We have fossils. The story you were told growing up is that fossils are called by a billion years. This takes time. But that doesn't make any sense. It's actually called pretty much immediately. And so what you have is we have footprints. You can follow the footprints of some ancient animal, and there is the skeleton. Now, I don't know about you, but if you were to walk through sand or the mud, your footprints aren't going to be there much longer. But if something immediately comes and crashes down, it will be imprinted onto the rocks. So fossilization doesn't happen over 500 million years, or however long we need it to happen for the purpose of our worldview. It happens immediately, and that makes sense whenever you see the same pattern throughout a world that there's a global flood. My favorite of these fossil examples, you get them at the Ark and the Creation Museum, is we have a big fish swallowing a smaller fish fossilized. That is cool because I'm a dude, right? I mean, that's just cool in general, right? I just love that. But it proves to me that this happened instantaneously, not gradually. Right? So you do with that whatever you want. That's my 5 cents. We are past time. Any questions that I could dodge? We made it through a chapter and a half.
Might as well take your time.
Yeah, I walked here, so Mandy just texted me. I'm going to need a ride, or I'm going to have to wait this bad boy. Thank you, neighbor. Appreciate it. All right, we'll stop it there.